Mr. Speaker, my government, Mr. Speaker, is clear-eyed about Fiji's place in the Pacific and our region's importance to the world. Alongside our fellow Pacific nations, we have elevated our interest on the global stage to a level never before achieved. There was a time, Mr. Speaker, when our region was written off as a testing ground for hydrogen bombs, when our voices were small and our interest forgotten. No more, never again. Today, when we speak, the world listens. Indeed, it takes a shallow and narrow view of history to suggest that Pacific regionalism is waning, as Fiji's deep bonds with our fellow Pacific nations have grown in strength in recent years. And as never before, we have leveraged that cooperation in pursuit of the global change the planet so desperately needs. Because we have spoken loudly and together. We are global champions on the most important issues affecting our people. We defend our fellow Pacific nations. They defend us. And together we speak in defense of humanity against serious threats like climate change. Under these circumstances, Mr. Speaker, regional cooperation not only presents an opportunity for us to overcome our problems, it is absolutely essential. We need to go beyond our shores, Mr. Speaker, to explore options, to share ideas and experiences, and to find innovative solutions to our challenges. We have done that, and we are doing that. As the rising seas inch closer to the doors of our Pacific homes, Fiji has offered permanent refuge to the citizens of Tuvalu and Kiribati, should they need it. Mr. Speaker, look anywhere in the world and you will not find a more powerful show of solidarity than that. Mr. Speaker, most of the people in this House do not know that it was the Suva Declaration, signed down the road at GPH, that first formalized national commitments to the 1.5 degrees Celsius target for global warming. Of course, we all know that went on to become a pillar of the Paris Agreement. An effort born from Pacific cooperation is now guiding the world through the next 3 decades to a net zero future in 2050. Never before, Mr. Speaker, never before. Here and now, our bonds within the region are strengthening. Our South-South cooperation programs are a case in point. Through the Fiji volunteer scheme that we have developed in collaboration with the Ministry of Employment, we have been able to deploy retired teachers and nurses to help some of our Pacific Island neighbors develop their education and health sectors. Previous generations of Pacific leaders understood this well, and we established together a number of regional institutions so that we could cooperate regionally on common concerns and make the most of the resources we had. Fiji has given much, Mr. Speaker, but we have also benefited greatly from these regional engagements. Our engagement in organizations like the Pacific Islands Forum, as has been mentioned, the Pacific Community, SPC, and the Forum Fisheries Agency, the FFA, to name just a few, have expanded our opportunities in trade and investments, fisheries, environment, forestry, agriculture, women's empowerment, and education. Fiji is also party to a number of beneficial regional trade agreements, and Fijian products can be found in shops all around the region. These exports are possible because of the positive trade relationships we have built with our Pacific family, which create a larger market for our Fijian businesses. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has taught us in spades that every nation, large or small, stands a better chance at achieving our best future by acting in solidarity with others. Fiji responded swiftly to contain COVID-19 and to keep it from entering our country. In the same manner, the Pacific region mobilized urgently the establishment of a Pacific Humanitarian Pathway for COVID-19, PHP-C. This mechanism, Mr. Speaker, provided an avenue for the quick movement of a much-needed assistance into the region. Fiji played an important part in this. We were able to assist our Pacific Island family not only to get their nationals home and reunite them with their families, but also to move much-needed PPEs and other equipment out into the region. It has been a learning experience, one that's shown us that we will only be able to successfully weather this crisis through our joint efforts. Our regional organizations, such as the Pacific Islands Forum and the Pacific Community, have played a huge role in this, as did our well-known international partners, such as the World Health Organization, the WHO. Mr. Speaker, we rightly regard ourselves as the leader in the region and as the hub of the Pacific. Our regional partners often acknowledge our leadership role, which stems from the fact that we are large and more developed than most of our neighbors and have a more diverse economy. But this role, Mr. Speaker, carries responsibilities, especially our smaller island brothers and sisters. We need their support as they need ours. We have an obligation to provide leadership and resources that will help raise the entire region. The Pacific region is not just our neighborhood. It is our home and the home of our fellow Pacific Islanders, with whom we are forever bound and with whom we must work closely to ensure our common future. When our neighbors advance, Mr. Speaker, we all know Fiji advances. Recent tragedies across the region have made it clear that we are some of the most vulnerable in the world to external shocks. Mr. Speaker, when I met with Pacific Island leaders in Tuvalu in 2019, we talked about the future of this blue Pacific continent that we share and the need for strong political leadership and solidarity to secure that future. As Pacific leaders, we argued that we needed to diverse a strategy that will take Fiji and the region to 2050. The 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, Mr. Speaker, will set the future strategic direction for the region, a direction guided by sustainability, economic growth, environmental stewardship, and equality. I am happy to report that it is currently under development and will be presented back to the Pacific leaders at the Pacific Islands Forum Leaders Summit, scheduled to be held later this year. In regional politics, Mr. Speaker, the world over, you can expect disagreements between nations. But friends trust that we will be able to overcome our disagreements. In the Pacific, our special way of communication has resolved many differences throughout our history. We are a family, and our common bonds, our common experience, and our shared destiny will always win out. Mr. Speaker, I've heard Honorable Tisawau mention the USP issue. Fiji's position on what should happen next for USP, as for Tisawau's comments on USP, is well aware. That has nothing to do with the PIF or the actions taken by the Micronesian countries, but I'll address those comments. As the host country, Mr. Speaker, of course, Fiji is invested in the success of USP students. We are the university's largest shareholder, contributing around $27 million in grants and around $20 million in TELs annually.
Order, order, order.
In total, Mr. Speaker, the Fijian government has invested around $315 million into USP over the last 10 years. Not to forget the 100 acres of property that the university sits on. We are so invested because we want to see the students of USP have the opportunity to do well. We want the same for all students in Fiji and throughout the Pacific. As the nation with the single greatest interest in the university, we have and we will always put a high value on USP's good governance. Ultimately, that is for the benefit of the students, the nation, and the region. When issues were raised 2 years ago about some alleged mismanagement, Fiji strongly supported the Council's decision to have the allegations investigated by an independent body, the BDO. Similarly, when more issues of mismanagement were raised last year, Fiji strongly recommended an independent investigation. The university, Mr. Speaker, is bigger than any one individual. The sooner we will accept that, the sooner the institution can move forward on the path towards good governance in the service of the region's students. And that is why yesterday, Mr. Speaker, during the FICAC statements, I had said that it would be good for FICAC to get into the university corridors because of the corrupt practices that is ravaged the corridors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.